observed. This time I'm going to break my case. I'll first begin with rebuttals. In my rebuttals, I'll be looking at the economic factors that government brought about. I'll then be looking at the point of exploitation, and last, exploitation, then followed by human rights, and lastly but not least, conditional investment. From then on, I'll be moving on to one very important matter, which I'll summarize in a minute, for being incentive for African development from Chinese investments, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on to economics. Ladies and gentlemen, government came and told us that in China, labor is taken from prisoners, ladies and gentlemen. What government needs to understand is that we are not looking at what China does, we're mainly looking at what Africa does. I haven't heard of a situation whereby African leaders have taken around prisoners and told them, you will become laborers and you will not be paid. I have not heard such a situation. So therefore, that example is rather irrelevant, ladies and gentlemen. What they also need to understand is that when Africans choose their leaders, it is upon the African leaders to make sure that they provide the proper labor incentive and that the laborers are given the proper working conditions which African leaders should have implemented upon their different continents, upon their different countries. So therefore, it is rather irrelevant to say that because China is using prisoners, therefore Africa is using prisoners as laborers. So therefore, I do not understand why such an example was brought into the argument, ladies and gentlemen. They then told us that the West then stimulate the African economy. As history tells us, Africa from Western events has rather weakened dismally and throughout centuries have rather become more dependent upon Western investment than rather necessary. So therefore I fail to understand how the Western have stimulated the African economy. I don't understand how that one works. As we've seen, China has brought upon themselves and has seen that it is rather imperative for them to intervene, for clearly Western countries have clearly failed to provide the proper investment needed to stimulate the African economy, that the government was talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, what they also fail to understand is that when it comes to infrastructure, the Western countries are rather biased. They will not help countries where there's a high number of poverty. What they'll rather do is rather take an excuse and say that no, we're going to label these countries as corrupt regimes, so therefore we'll not intervene. That is what the Western countries do. So therefore that is how China steps in and sees in the missing gaps. So therefore China takes the initiative which the Western countries have failed to do and say, listen, if the Western countries will come up with dismal excuses not to intervene, we as China will clearly step up and meet the needs and clearly intervene where clearly the Western countries have failed to intervene. Ladies and gentlemen, the then tells that Western countries, that China exploits Africans when it comes to invest. What they fail to understand is China and the African leaders signed a contract whereby it was based on a mutual benefit basis. What does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? What that means is that both China and Africa will benefit. So therefore, I fail to understand how exploitation can take place if it's based on a mutual benefit basis. So therefore, that point falls flat, ladies and gentlemen. What they also need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, is that when it comes to human rights, they should not mention Western Africa. Should we not forget about Guantanamo Bay, whereby human rights do not matter? Should we clearly just forget about that and say, no, when it comes to Western, we'll put them elsewhere. Let us just only focus on China. So therefore, who are they to question what's happening? And what China is doing is merely agreeing to the contract when clearly the African leaders told them, you guys cannot intervene when it comes to our practices and political intervention within the African societies. So therefore, China is only fulfilling its contract which the African leaders imposed upon them. So therefore, it is up to the African leaders to deal with the human rights situation in their own countries. And because China signed that non-interference policy, they cannot interfere whatsoever, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, when it comes to human rights, let the Western first deal with Guantanamo Bay, and then maybe they can look at other countries so they can set a proper example, ladies and gentlemen. Yes.
Could you please deal then with all my second speaker's matter about how the Chinese are using it to influence votes in the UN and such for things against humanitarian rights?
Oh, humanitarians, guys. This is a very interesting point. Apparently the guns only come from China. What government fails to understand is guns come from the West. Examples, Angola, Rwanda. Did I mention more, ladies and gentlemen, where guns come from? So clearly there's a problem with that matter. I do not understand what they're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, what we also need to understand is that once the West pulls out, Africa will fail dismally. Why? For Africa has been programmed to merely rely on the West. So therefore, they cannot function once the West leave. What does China do? Well, China does that. It comes in and says, listen, we'll build different infrastructures for you. We'll help develop Africa for its a mutual benefit basis. So therefore, they work on empowering Africa, so that when the time comes for them to leave, Africa will be able to stand on their own feet and continue running without having to worry about looking for aid elsewhere, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, clearly China promotes that. Clearly China has what it takes to finally give Africa that pedestal that they've been needing to walk on, ladies and gentlemen. What they also told us is that conditional investment is the best way to do it. What they fail to understand is that West actually promotes dictatorships, ladies and gentlemen, for they are willing to promote within countries whereby they're corrupt leaders, and they're willing to invest that money and put it in their bank accounts. Whereby we've clearly shown you that when it comes to China, they think about these and do not want to promote corruption. So therefore, they invest their money they make sure that when they invest the money, they have their own Swiss accounts to invest on, ladies and gentlemen. So therefore, that case clearly falls flat, ladies and gentlemen. Now I'm going to quickly run on incentive for African development, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, China promotes incentives such as education. What China did is that in Cameroon, they started building schools and hospitals, so they saw a necessity for such infrastructures upon Africa. For we all know that the only way a country can develop is through education, and they have provided such strong infrastructure within Africa so they can increase the literacy rate and have given them opportunity to study in China, and then after studying to come back and plant that knowledge within Africa. So therefore, they're providing an excellent infrastructure upon the education system. They've also helped transfer skills from what they do in Africa from what they do in China towards Africa. For what they do is, because they know people can't know the knowledge, what they do is they send the proper professional management to help train and foresee that China does the proper things which is needed, and clearly that is what Africa needs. So therefore, let us stop promoting inequality and help China invest in Africa, so that finally Africans can stand on their own 2 feet and move on. Thank you very much.